Welcome to this edition of Diligence Inside Europe's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, and I'll be your host for today's show. Today, we're going to be talking about shareholder activism in Europe 2022. And joining me to have this discussion is Josh Black, who's the editor-in-chief with Insightia. And that's a diligent company. And Josh, welcome.
Thanks, TK. Thanks for having me.
I think maybe a good place to start, Josh, is to let our audience know a little bit about Insightia and what it does.
Yeah, sure. So we're fairly new to the Diligent family. We were announced as part of Diligent in January, but we've been going about 10 years now. And Insightia is really a database and news service focused on all things shareholder activism, engagement, voting, and stewardship. And we provide a lot of information about activist investors. That's something I've been covering since my early days in the company. But we also look at shareholder proposals, how big institutional investors vote on issues such as director re-elections and say on pay, and increasingly the new ESG resolutions that are coming to a vote. And we also have quite extensive data on boards of directors and corporate bylaws.
Well, that makes perfect sense on why Diligent would want you as a member of the family. That information is all critical to board members, officers, and the companies that are part of the Diligent family. So I welcome you to the fold. So I really enjoyed one of your reports, the Shareholder Activism in Europe 2022, and I was hoping that you might be able to sort of summarize the activism trends going on across the Europe companies and what we can expect in 2022.
Yeah, so activism was fairly strong going into 2020 in Europe, but the pandemic had a pretty big impact on campaigns, I think for cultural reasons, as well as the ability of activists overseas to travel. There was a big knock to the number of campaigns that we saw in Europe across the last 2 years. And really at the beginning of this year, we started to see the beginnings of a rebound, particularly in the UK, where there was a fairly strong resurgence in campaigns by large cap activists like Trian Partners and CVM Capital. We started to see more proxy contests. We started to see more optimism about companies' M&A prospects, whereas the activism that we saw over the pandemic tended to be more reactive. It was much more about shoring up balance sheets. It was much more about stopping deals that shareholders didn't like or thought were kind of lowball efforts, rather than pushing companies to consider a strategic review. So yeah, we've started to see more activism. We've started to see a kind of re-establishment of the rhythms of activist investing, and that's brought with it a whole range of different issues. Of course, one of the things that we're seeing more and more of is ESG activism, which is something that was much more prevalent in America going into 2021 to 2022, but we started to see that being used by European activists to put companies under pressure.
Typically, Europe's a little ahead on the ESG. I guess there's always outliers of companies, though, that end up being targets for activist investors.
I think that's true. I think that although Europe is ahead in many ways, we've started to see the same kinds of trends in terms of activists pushing for companies with valuation discrepancies between the different businesses. We've started to see businesses with large companies with large coal businesses, for instance, push to be more active in transitioning. Some of the legal frameworks in Europe and the UK do tend to enable shareholders and activists to push for certain ESG trends such as climate control. Obviously, the Say on Climate campaign, which has spread across the world, was started by a UK hedge fund, the Children's Investment Fund, and its foundation. So in some senses, it seemed natural that ESG activism would take off in Europe. It was just a surprise that it was slightly delayed.
Yeah. So there's no question, I think, when you look at both sides of the pond, that activism is on the rise. And in the States, you have the universal ballot that's coming as well, which is going to probably increase that. But in Europe, what should the corporate boards there be doing to protect or to prepare for activists and the rise in campaigns and someone sitting on their doorstep?
Yeah, I think the thing that we recommend above all is knowing your shareholders. And that extends both to the shareholders that are active managers and may come on and off your register and may be activists, may have gone public in a situation once or twice before, or maybe a repeat offender. It also means knowing your institutional shareholders, their voting policies, whether they're likely to support an activist, whether they have issues with the way you run your company's governance, whether that's your board composition, your bylaws, increasingly the ESG initiatives that you're undertaking, and your performance and strategic decisions such as capital operations and capital allocation. Checking in with your shareholders regularly, understanding their concerns, but then also knowing if a shareholder contacts your IR department or turns up on your shareholder register, what's their history, what do they tend to push for, what tactics do they use, and use that information to be prepared for what may come further down the road, because the best preparation is to really consider what kind of attacks you're going to come under.
Yeah. There's a popular phrase they asked companies and boards to think like an activist, and to understand where the soft belly might be in your organization, that an activist or someone from the outside would look and say, that looks like a viable penetration. It almost sounds like cyber, doesn't it?
Indeed. Or, to make it more simple, be like the Boy Scouts and be prepared.
Yeah. So, Josh, we just touched on the amount of good information that's in this Shareholder Activism in Europe report. So where can people get a copy to view the full results?
Yeah, so you can get a copy on our website, Insightia.com. That's insightia.com. And on our social media pages on Twitter, LinkedIn. We also have podcasts, and we did a podcast on the topic of this report. It's easily found on all good podcast providers as Beyond the Boardroom.
Well, Josh, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us. We'll look forward to more reports down the road and see if we can't talk about those as well. So I want to thank you for joining us, and good luck with Insightia.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the warm welcome.
And that will conclude this edition of Diligence Inside Europe's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again in the near future with another show that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.